Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. We are delighted to be joined today by Elan Carr, the U.S. State Department Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism and friend of AJC. In 2019, Elan Carr spoke at the annual AJC Global Forum in Washington, D.C. Today, he joins us for a discussion on combating the rise of global antisemitism. Moderating today's conversation is Holly Huffnagle, AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism. After we hear from Special Envoy Carr, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. Holly, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jillian. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Our topic today is combating the rise of global anti-Semitism. This is a complex topic, and there are no easy answers and nor one-size-fits-all solutions, but there are ways that we can be effective. I would like to start with one such way, and that is the creation of a U.S. government office whose sole job it is to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Special Envoy Carr, first, welcome again to AJC's Advocacy Anywhere. Thank you for being here. I'd like to begin by discussing the Office of the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism itself. So just a little background for our audience. In the early 2000s, Congressman Tom Lantos, who was the only Holocaust survivor to serve in Congress, helped write the Global Anti-Semitism Review Act, which was sponsored by Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey in the House and Senator George Voinovich from Ohio in the Senate. This bipartisan act, supported by AJC, was subsequently passed by the US Congress and signed into law by President George W. Bush in 2004. It mandated that the US Department of State monitor and combat anti-Semitism around the world, and it created this position of a special envoy. Special Envoy Carr, you are now the fourth special envoy to be appointed since this legislation was passed, and I believe you are the first envoy to hire staff for particular areas of focus.
Right.
So I have two questions for you to start. First, can you share with us your office structure and what you and your staff are prioritizing? And then secondly, how is your office integrated into the rest of the State Department?
Certainly. Well, first of all, let me say how happy I am to be here. I'm so glad I was introduced as also as a friend of AJC. A very true statement. I sing the AJC's praises. So many game-changing initiatives have been advanced by your potent advocacy. And I cannot thank you enough for continuously pushing to make the Jewish people stronger and safer, but also to make our world a better place. So thank you. And second of all, I want to say how happy I am, Holly, that you now officially have been appointed to handle, on behalf of AJC, the national anti-Semitism portfolio. So important. And I got to say, AJC could not possibly have made a better choice. Of course, I've followed your work. Yes, I'm the fourth envoy. As you know, you worked for one of my predecessors and you did a phenomenal job, and you will do a phenomenal job for AJC. And I'm just so excited, literally couldn't have anyone better in this role. And we're gonna be great partners and work together. And I'm very excited about that.
Thank you.
With regard to my office, that's correct. You know, we have a global mandate, and anti-Semitism is rising everywhere in the world, including right here at home. And so, you know, we thought the best way to structure the office would be to have real subject matter experts as assistant special envoys who would handle different portfolios. So I have an assistant special envoy who handles Europe and Asia, Eurasia. and also strategic projects. One of those strategic projects, by the way, is a global BDS and standing up to and fighting the global BDS campaign. That's Assistant Special Envoy David Payman. I have an Assistant Special Envoy who focuses on the Middle East, the Arab world, the Middle East, and Latin America as well, the Americas. And she is also a liaison to the organized Jewish community, and that's Assistant Special Envoy Eli Kohanim, who's known well to AJC, been involved in AJC for a long time. And then I have an Assistant Special Envoy assigned to focus exclusively, and this is a very important point, exclusively on the phenomenon of internet anti-Semitism, online hate, which is such an important and destructive driver of this rise in anti-Semitism. The internet and social media doesn't cause anti-Semitism, but there's no question it's the chief vector of this disease. And so I have a principal person on my team who focuses exclusively on that. I also have a senior advisor who's a career person at the State Department, excellent, and she also deals with international organizations. And so, you know, this is a testament to the priority on this fight placed by President Trump and Secretary Pompeo that have, you know, my office is 3 times larger than my predecessors, and it's because there really is a focus on this on behalf of, on the part of the administration. They are determined to give anti-Semitism no quarter. And at this urgent time, I think, you know, thank God that we have that kind of mandate.
Thank you for your response, Special Envoy Carr. I would like to actually direct our conversation now to what you're seeing in the field, or what you used to see in the field before COVID-19. And I want to start talking about anti-Semitism in the Arab world, in part because of your personal connection. So would you mind just sharing a little bit with our audience about your personal background, and then tell us what trends in anti-Semitism you are seeing in the Arab world and what can be done to address them?
Well, it's a great question, because in one of my very first speeches when I was appointed, I said, we will ignore no part of the ideological spectrum in terms of where anti-Semitism comes from, but also we will ignore no region in the world. And in fact, the Arab world has more potential in turning a new page on this fight against anti-Semitism than ever before, for a number of reasons. You know, the Iranian threat, geopolitical realignment in the region, but we're seeing Arab countries really rethink not just their relationship with Israel, but how they think about the Jewish people, Jewish history, their own Jewish histories. I mean, after all, many Arab countries had rich, ancient Jewish communities, that rich heritage of Jewish communities that were there for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. You asked about my background. My family were refugees from Iraq. My mother, as a young girl, saw her father be arrested and go to prison for no reason other than his being a Jew. And the rest of my family fled across the border to Iran, a very different Iran, the Iran of the Shah that was helping Jews escape and giving Jews asylum. Very different Iran from today. The Iran of today, the Islamic Republic, is the world's chief state sponsor of not only terrorism, but anti-Semitism. And so I'm particularly sensitive not only to anti-Semitism in the Arab world, but also to the wonderful history of Jews in the Arab world, the philo-Semitism that we sometimes experienced in Arab and Islamic history. And so this has been a big focus of mine, and we're working on some exciting initiatives, and I'm very excited about some of the developments we're seeing throughout the Arab world, in the Gulf, but also in other parts of the Arab world that are really reassessing their relationship with the world Jewish community, including the State of Israel.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. That's good to hear. And, you know, when we think about the global problem of anti-Semitism, one thing we often say is just how complex anti-Semitism today is, and how crucial it is for us to understand how it differs across regions and what factors fuel it. So I want to move away from the Arab world and now turn to Europe. From your vantage point, let's look at Western Europe. What factors are fueling anti-Semitism in Western Europe? I'm thinking of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, maybe even the Scandinavian countries. And then secondly, and maybe more importantly, how can the US government be more persuasive in Western Europe on issues of anti-Semitism?
So first of all, let me answer your question globally, and then I'll drill down, because the truth is that anti-Semitism globally in every region comes from three primary ideological camps. There's the ethnic supremacists on the far right. You know, these are the neo-Nazis, the haters. They hate really everybody who's not like them, but they certainly, Jews top the list. And you see, you know, far-right political movements, torchlit marches, vile, venomous internet chat rooms where Nazi ideology is preached openly. I mean, it's despicable. So you have that camp, which of course has produced, you know, violence in Europe, in Halle, for example, and in Strasbourg, there have been attacks, violence right here at home, the Pittsburgh shooter, the Poway shooter. So very dangerous. Then we've got the radical left, Israel hatred, anti-Zionism. And this is the anti-Semitism that we see that has led to appalling harassment and discrimination against Jewish students on campuses, not only in the United States, but across the world, certainly in Western Europe. It's the anti-Semitism we saw in the Labour Party. It's the reason why British Jews publicly said that their survival is threatened. I mean, they publicly said that this anti-Semitism of the left threatens the survival of the Jewish community of the United Kingdom. And so we see rising anti-Semitism on the far left that usually is associated with hostility toward Jewish peoplehood and Jewish national self-determination. And then the third camp is Militant Islam, which is not only a factor in the Middle East, certainly in the Middle East, but you know what happens in the Middle East directly affects the European street, the US college campus. And so that's why, like we said before, our focus on the Arab world, the Muslim world is so important. Those are the three camps. Now to your question about regions. Every region has a different trigger, a different flavor, a different combination. But the fact is, you see all three camps operating together in different proportions in different regions. So, you know, in Western Europe, certainly you can say, well, a dominant problem in Western Europe might be the anti-Semitism of the far left and militant Islam, right? I mean, that's what you're certainly seeing in rhetoric. Militant Islam has been the chief source of violence against Jews in Western Europe on the street. It's the reason why when I visited Paris and I came out of a synagogue on Shabbat, I was told by Jews, take off your kippah, it's not safe. And I said, why isn't it safe? They said, well, you've got an angry Arab alienated population here. Now, I'm not evaluating whether it's true or not, but I'm just simply saying that, you know, meaning I'm not evaluating whether one should or should not wear a kippah, but what I'm saying is that's the perception. And so militant Islam and the far left is an issue in Western Europe, but so is the far right. I mean, in Strasbourg, France, there's an anti-Semitic incident almost every week. And so, whereas in some countries you might have an equal balance of far right, radical left, and militant Islam, in some countries it's really more the far right that's dominant. In some countries it's the radical left that's dominant. And so you can't really generalize, but these are the three ideological camps. But let me say one thing that's very important, Holly. You cannot be serious about fighting anti-Semitism unless you're serious about fighting all three. And this has really been our mantra. We will not ignore any part of this because, you know, if you leave 1/3 of a tumor untreated, the patient doesn't do well. So if you're serious about fighting this despicable evil, this human sickness that is anti-Semitism, you've got to fight all three because Jew hatred is Jew hatred. And it doesn't matter what ideological clothing it wears.
Special Envoy Carr, that actually brings me perfectly to the next question. There was a Fundamental Rights Agency poll, two of them actually, and I'm going back to the first one that was done in 2013 that surveyed Jewish attitudes in several EU member states. And one of the questions that was asked was, have you considered emigrating from your country because of anti-Semitism in the last 5 years? And the survey revealed that over 40% of Jews in France said yes. What was interesting is that the survey also showed that over 40% of Jews in Hungary also said yes. And if you didn't know much about the anti-Semitism in each of these countries, you might think that they were the same. And as you know, and I know, that couldn't be further from the truth. So I now want to turn our focus to Eastern Europe, to Hungary, maybe to Poland as well, to some other these countries, because what we're witnessing is something actually a little bit different. And I want to start actually in Poland. There was a recent presidential election where there was some anti-Jewish sentiment used as a tactic by President Andrzej Duda's campaign. And was your office able to respond to that by chance?
So I think the dominant anti-Semitism problem in Eastern and Central Europe are far-right movements that are not in government. Very important to say, these are not, we're not talking about peace in Poland or the Hungarian dominant party of Prime Minister Orban, but we're talking about, Fidesz, but we're talking about far-right movements that are sometimes overtly anti-Semitic in their rhetoric and in their intentions. Sometimes they're indirectly anti-Semitic. For example, in the rehabilitation of Holocaust-era figures. Sometimes the motivation for that rehabilitation is directly anti-Semitic. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's nationalist movements, but the effect is anti-Semitic. And so the Jews in Eastern and Central Europe with whom I've met, I met with the Hungarian Jewish community, I met with the Polish Jewish community, I met with the Ukrainian Jewish community, and what I hear from the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe is real worry about these far-right movements, and concern that sometimes the government isn't forceful enough in condemning them. Now, I heard very clearly from Jews in Poland and in Hungary that the Peace Party and the Fidesz Party are not anti-Semitic. They were very open, and actually, things couldn't be safer on the ground. The Jews of Hungary are, it was opened, walking in the street, kippot, Orthodox community, openly walking in the street. I took a taxi on a Friday, and because I took a taxi to a synagogue, the cab driver, not Jewish, said to me, "Have a good Shabbat." And so it really is a very open and vibrant Jewish life in Hungary, but there is deep concern about these far-right movements, and that has to be addressed. You can't. Every country has crazy people, but the key is for the governments and the national leaders to be very forceful to say, this is beyond the pale. It's not acceptable. We won't tolerate. And so I'm actually grateful that we have seen some of those statements come out of our leaders in Eastern and Central Europe.
Thank you for that answer. I want to stay with it just a little bit longer. On the government official side, which I think you're right, that the real anti-Semitism is not necessarily in the government itself, it's in these far-right movements. But how do you respond to, government officials, like elected officials who do dabble in Holocaust revisionism, like we're seeing in Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, or even spread the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, maybe around George Soros, for instance, especially in Hungary? How do we respond to that? And I ask only because I think the US government right now has a very friendly bilateral relationship with these countries. So how do we kind of navigate this, especially when they're outspokenly pro-Israel too?
They're pro-Israel, and they take care of their domestic Jewish communities. Poland is investing a lot in Jewish festivals. There's a wonderful Jewish center in Krakow. There's really and then in Hungary, certainly. Hungary, like I said, the Hungarian Jewish community is truly vibrant. And so, yes, they take care of their Jews domestically. They're very pro-Israel and have defended Israel in the EU, and they're great American allies. But look, sometimes allies can differ, and when there are issues on which we differ, we make our views known diplomatically. And we found actually that these countries are very receptive to working with the United States, and in many cases to working with Israel on a whole host of issues, not only on combating anti-Semitism in Europe, but on a whole host of other issues. And so I actually think these are very important allies, both of the United States and of Israel. And sometimes if there are far-right movements that are threatening Jewish life in these countries, it's very important to stand up and call them out on it. We certainly have done that. And there have been occasions when leaders in Central and Eastern Europe have been very forceful in calling them out as well.
Thank you. Speaking about allies actually leads me to my next question, because we talk about how we can't do this alone. We can't fight anti-Semitism alone, how important it is to have coalitions to tackle the problem. And if you don't mind talking about how your office partners with foreign governments or even multilateral organizations such as the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that would be wonderful.
So we work bilaterally and multilaterally all the time. And the OSCE is a perfect example. And my goodness, look at the AJC and the work you've done in the OSCE, thanks to my dear friend, Rabbi Andy Baker, who's been such a force in his advocacy. And so the OSCE is a key forum for us, but also other places. I mean, I've worked with the EU. My colleague Katharina von Schnurbein, the EU Commissioner on Anti-Semitism, is such a force and such a leader, and has been such a game changer in dealing with pressing issues, including online anti-Semitism and many other issues as well. And so we work in all of these multilateral fora, but then bilaterally as well. We are engaging all around the world constantly. And now with a much larger team, we really have the bandwidth to engage all around the world. We're engaging in Latin America, even as we speak, dealing with not only strategic initiatives, but also reacting to issues as they happen. We're engaging in Europe all the time, not only on anti-Semitic incidences, but on the adoption, for example, of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, one of my top diplomatic asks when I go overseas. We engage bilaterally with countries on hate crimes prosecution. I had the great privilege of visiting Germany and meeting with Interior and Justice Ministry officials from 7 separate German states who came together to share best practices on how best to investigate, prosecute, appropriately punish hate crimes. In France, we engaged on security issues for the Jewish community, how to make sure that Jews feel safe. But we are engaging on a whole host of issues around the world, and so this is a key part of our work as America's diplomat on the issue of anti-Semitism. It's very important we make our views known. And I'll tell you, Holly, nobody ignores us. I mean, the message has gone out loudly and clearly that it's not just the special envoy on anti-Semitism who cares about this. It's my boss, Secretary of State Pompeo, and it's his boss, the President of the United States. They really care. And so every leader I meet with, and I meet with leaders at the highest level, they know that they are talking to somebody who directly speaks for the Secretary of State and the President of the United States. And so they take us very seriously. Now, look, these are sovereign countries, they make their own decisions. But when we make an important request and we say this is important to us, I'll tell you, people take us, every country that we meet with takes us very seriously. And also, it's not just the idea that the President and the Secretary care about this. The message has gone out that anti-Semitism is rising. I mean, everyone gets it. This is, the world understands this is appalling. 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, to see anti-Semitism rising in Europe and in the United States, it's embarrassing for all of us. And so I think there really is a unity of purpose. I have the great privilege, Holly, of working with partners and allies all the time who are passionate advocates for this cause. And so I really think that, I might have been worried if we were standing alone, but we're not. We have great allies in this fight against Jew hatred in the world, and I'm confident that with those kinds of partnerships, we can roll this despicable hatred back.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. I'm glad you mentioned the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism in your previous answer. We are trying to encourage governments around the world to adopt and use this definition. And we recently saw Spain adopt it. So from your vantage point, and given what you were saying about having these bilateral conversations with leaders of countries all over the world, do you see any, where will the IRA definition go next? Do you see any movement ahead of other countries that are looking to adopt it?
For sure. I mean, we see movement out of the IRA group, right? So Argentina adopted IRA recently. There have been countries in Central America that have been adopted IRA. So we're seeing actually movement even outside the multilateral group of IRA countries. And that's very, very important. And I want to compliment Germany, because Germany has now taken over the presidency of IRA, and they have made it their mission to get every single IRA member to adopt this nationally. Of course, every country already has adopted it for purposes of IRA. That was unanimous. But now to adopt it internally is especially important. And let me tell you why it's important. Because in addition to defining anti-Semitism as, well, Jew hatred, as you might expect, IRA goes on, as you know, to list a number of examples. There are 11, there's an overriding example, and then 10 others that explain how anti-Semitism looks today, what the manifestations are of anti-Semitism. And those examples cover not only traditional medieval anti-Semitism. You know, the Jews are to blame for every problem in the world. The Jews control the banks in the world. But it also covers the anti-Semitism of the left, what we call the modern anti-Semitism. So targeting the state of Israel as a Jewish collective is an example. But denying the Jewish people their right of self-determination, for example, by claiming that the founding of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor, is an example. Comparing Israel to the Nazis, or exacting of Israel a double standard to which no other democracies held. These are all examples of anti-Semitism in the IHRA definition. And so that's why this is so important. I'm proud to say that after this great definition was adopted by IHRA, the State Department has been using it officially. Actually, we started using it even earlier, since 2010, but now we adopted the full IHRA definition. And now, thanks to an executive order by President Trump, a groundbreaking, game-changing executive order in December, President Trump has adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism for the interagency. And this is now so deeply important. And so this is really a game changer. And again, AJC played such a key role in helping to craft and advance this definition. And I can't thank you enough for your work in this regard.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. And you mentioned President Trump's executive order, which again, perfectly leads me into my next question, which is about what's happening here in the United States. Now, I know the Global Anti-Semitism Review Act mandates that your office monitors and combats anti-Semitism in foreign countries. Yet, as you mentioned, you've been able to work on anti-Semitism domestically as well. So may you share with our audience, what you're working on in the United States, and then what challenges are we facing domestically?
So yes, my statutory mandate is overseas only, but the White House has asked me in certain respects to focus on certain domestic instances of anti-Semitism. So to give you some examples, I responded on behalf of the entire administration in Poway after that horrific murder of Lori Kay, Zichronah Livracha, who was murdered in synagogue on Shabbat for no reason other than she was a Jew by a far-right despicable extremist. And so I represented the administration at her funeral. I spoke at her funeral. And what I said there on behalf of the president is that we are at war with these far-right ethnic supremacists who pretend like they're patriotic Americans, but they're not. Their ideology is as anti-American as you can get. We are at war with these people. And this administration has done something unprecedented. In US history, we have, for the first time, designated a far-right anti-Semitic group as a terrorist organization. It's never been done before. And so very proud of that step. And so we're fighting, like I said before, fighting the anti-Semites on the far right, the anti-Semites on the radical left, and the anti-Semites in militant Islam. And so I responded to Poway. I responded to Jersey City. And I helped lead a delegation of 3 members of Congress, the Attorney General of New Jersey and the Chief of Police of the state of New Jersey, in an official visit to the scene of the murders in Jersey City. I conducted a broad-based community initiative in Lakewood, where in Lakewood, New Jersey, you're seeing terrifying anti-Semitism rising in the neighboring communities. And so we brought together law enforcement and community leaders of government, local and state government, in a large meeting to discuss tangible steps that we can take to push back. And I've met with prosecutors. I've met with prosecutors, like I said, in Germany, but I've also met with prosecutors in the United States. Now, I'm a prosecutor. I spent 13 years as a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles, prosecuting gangs and domestic violence and sexual assault, but I also prosecuted hate crimes. And so I know a little bit about this. And so I was very proud to work with prosecutors in Germany and in the United States on what we can do to not only prosecute the more serious hate crimes, but also to deal with more minor crimes. This is a big issue I get all over the world and right here at home. What happens when you get a trespass? There's an anti-Semitic flavor to it, but the kid's a minor. What can you do to a minor? Or the crime it's barely a crime, or sometimes it's not anti-Semitic. A skinhead shoplifts a beer. How can you really? What do you do with that? And so there are answers, and we discussed ways that we can force defendants and suspects, even when they're not defendants, when no charges are filed, to undergo tolerance programs, to force them into programs that are wonderful, and that I've personally seen, that in my work as a prosecutor, change these kids' lives. And so these are the things that I've been working on both here in the United States and around the world. And I'm excited, actually. I think the law enforcement community has a real role to play here in not only enforcing our laws, but in intervening in the lives of young people who are getting radicalized and cutting that process of radicalization off.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. And I'll ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to questions from our audience. And this is a broad question, but it's a, where do we go from here question? And I think those of us in this fight, we often talk about how challenging it can be to be proactive, to think ahead in this space. We're often reactive, responding to all these incidents that go on around us. So what is it that you still hope to do and accomplish?
So I'm thrilled by that question, because I think you're asking exactly the question that anyone in this role needs to ask. And that is, how can I go on the offense against anti-Semitism? Most of what we do is defensive. And that's okay, it needs to be. You know, when you're talking about an onslaught of Jew hatred, you've got to defend against that. So when we deal with physical security for Jewish communities, or condemnation of anti-Semitic movements or statements, or hate crimes prosecution, like we just talked about, all important, all critical, but all defensive. How do you go on the offense? As I see it, there is one critical way to turn the tables 180 degrees and go on the offense against Jew hatred. And what is Jew hatred? Apart from its manifestations, it's an idea, it's a worldview, and ultimately I would argue it's a spiritual sickness. The way to go on the offense on that is by driving and inculcating and educating in philo-Semitism, driving a philo-Semitic narrative that teaches appreciation and affection for the Jewish people, the Jewish story, the incredible biblical and modern story of the Jewish people and the values of Judaism that have brought so much to the world. Look, Holly, you can't tell the story of the United States of America without talking about the Jewish values that informed our founding and our mission to this day. You can't tell the history of England or France or Germany or Poland or Hungary without talking about the profound and indelible contributions that the Jewish communities have made to these countries. Why don't we teach that? Why don't we drive into every classroom, into every city, an understanding of what that history is? So, for example, in Poland, we have an absolute treasure, the Polin Museum in Warsaw, which is a museum that covers the 900 years of Jewish history in Poland with affection and understanding and depth, not only the anti-Semitism, but the incredible involvement of Jews in making Poland what it is today. It's a national treasure in Poland. I commend it to all of our viewers to visit. But here's a question: how can we be proactive in driving that content into the classroom? So you're not waiting for people to come to the museum, but you're using its content to teach. Another great example, Germany. Germany next year, in year 2021, will be officially commemorating, get this, 1,700 years of Jewish history in Germany. That's in year 2021. And so we're working strategically with our German interlocutors to say, okay, in addition to declaring this year, what is the content? So that every German kid in every classroom knows not only that it's 1,700 years, but understands something about the basics of the content of those years and how important those years are, so that German kids can be proud of the Jewish history of Germany, and that Jews can be proud of that history as well. And last example, because you asked about domestic things, right here at home in the United States, I bet very few of our viewers know that we have, for 40 years in this country, a presidentially declared bipartisan period of time that commemorates Jewish heritage in this country. It used to be a week, Jewish Heritage Week, and then for the last 15 years, it's been a month, Jewish American Heritage Month. Now, I talk all around the country and I ask this question and I get blank stares. No one has heard of this. And the reason why is because we have a vehicle that's gift wrapped to deliver some content about Jewish peoplehood and the Jewish contributions to America, and we really haven't done very much about it. And it's America's best kept secret is Jewish American Heritage Month. And so we are working aggressively on these strategic initiatives of helping craft, develop, and drive a philo-Semitic narrative. That's how you are proactive against anti-Semitism. And that's how you go on the offense, by talking about what Jews have brought to the world so that people have actual affection and respect for Jewish history and for the Jewish people.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. And I completely agree that we need to encourage non-Jews to learn about Jewish history and Jewish contribution to society. It's really kind of the way, and we're seeing this a lot of with the special envoys and coordinators in Europe, actually connecting Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism and promoting Jewish life. We're seeing that kind of being connected now, which is really important.
They are connected, and I think they're inextricable. You have to talk about both together, because Holly, if our history and our story is all about hatred, then who is the Jewish people? We have let anti-Semites win if the Jewish people come to be defined through anti-Semitism. And so, yes, we have to combat anti-Semitism, but we also have to affirmatively embrace and champion the Jewish story and Jewish history and the values of Judaism. And that's a key part of this.
I completely agree. I think my one fear might be that, we know that philo-Semites also use anti-Semitic tropes, philo-Semitic tropes, right? Praising Jews for love of money, praising Jews for being good in business, and that would be my only concern, that philo-Semitism and anti-Semitism, are they two sides of the same coin? But what you're saying, I think, is actually a little bit different. It's promoting that contribution, that society, knowing what Jews have done for nation building and who they are as a people. So,
first of all, I would say it is different, because we're talking about promoting not a trope and a fantasy, but something real and actual. Number one, that's the most important thing. But second of all, look, I often get asked sometimes by cynics, well, do you also focus on the people who love Jews too much and say that, well, they love Jews for unreasonable reasons? Okay. They love Jews unreasonably. And my answer is always, I've got bigger fish to fry than focusing on the people who love Jews unreasonably. I'm focusing on those who hate Jews unreasonably, not those who love the Jews unreasonably.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. And Julian, sorry to take longer on that, but I would like to now turn the floor over to you, and we can hear from our audience.
Thank you both. We are getting a lot of questions from our live audience. And the first one comes from Michael Bass on Zoom, who says, I was fortunate to see Special Envoy Carr at the Department of Justice Summit on Anti-Semitism in DC in July 2019. To the extent you're able to share, have you seen overall improvement as a result of this summit?
Yes, actually, that summit was amazing. And for those of you who don't know, thank you, Michael, for that question. For those of you who don't know, this was a summit at the Department of Justice in which the State Department participated. I spoke, and all of the others were the Attorney General of the United States, the Secretary of Education of the United States, the Director of the FBI. I mean, it was a remarkable all of government, full administration, full court press against anti-Semitism. And it goes to show you, I mean, again, like I said before, the message has gone out loudly and clearly. It's not only, the special envoy, we parochial types who assigned to this who care. It really is the president and the entire team that cares about this. And certainly no one more so than Secretary Pompeo. And so this really is an all of government approach, an administration that is second to none in terms of defending the Jewish people and supporting the state of Israel and combating anti-Semitism. Now, in terms of improvement, yes, I think it was largely out of that conference that came a number of initiatives from the Justice Department focusing on hate crimes. I mean, General Barr, went to Brooklyn in the midst of horrific attacks on the Jewish community and said, enough is enough. We will not, the law enforcement community won't stand for this. Secretary DeVos has been incredible. I mean, look at what's happening now with the enforcement of Title VI, thanks to the President Trump's executive order in December. Again, I think also that partly came out of that Department of Justice summit, because again, the Department of Education was front and center of that summit. President Trump signed an executive order saying Title VI civil rights protections will apply to Jews because Jew hatred is racism. It's nothing other. We know that. I mean, it's nothing other than racism. Let's call it what it is, and let's treat it like racism. And so now we're seeing the empowerment of Jewish student groups on campus that are standing up and saying, you know, we're not gonna be harassed and marginalized and discriminated against. And so, yes, I do think we're seeing improvements in the United States. Now, anti-Semitism is rising. It's rising here in the United States. It's rising in Europe. It's rising all over the world. We've got to deal with that and confront it. So the United States is sadly no exception. We still are the most philo-Semitic country in the world, but anti-Semitism is rising even right here at home. But yes, I've seen improvements in terms of our all of government approach to combat.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Joe Greenberg in Phoenix, Arizona, who says, we've recently seen Facebook boycotts and Twitter walkouts over anti-Semitic content online. Europe's laws over hate speech are quite different from our own. What do you think is the best way to fight hate speech on social media?
Well, I'm happy to say, I can't thank you enough for that question, because, you know, we're about to announce a very important initiative in this regard. And I think that this is a key issue. We will not roll back this rise in Jew hatred unless we deal with the vector, which is the internet and social media. Now, that doesn't mean censorship. I mean, the First Amendment is not a burden for us. We believe that the First Amendment is a gift for all of us, right? And that means the freedom to express despicable ideas. That's part of freedom of speech. And so we champion that, we embrace it. It's a wonderful thing about being an American. But that doesn't mean that you can't deal with it. You can deal with it. First of all, the moment that hate speech leaves the realm of protection and becomes incitement to violence, we've got to be more aggressive in dealing with unprotected hate speech, with the illegal hate speech. But second of all, if speech is protected, and a lot of hate speech is, look, Supreme Court case, right? I mean, the neo-Nazis could march in Skokie, Illinois. That's a US Supreme Court case, right? So even horrific hate speech can be protected speech, but you've got to be able to deal with it. And that doesn't mean ad hoc, that doesn't mean willy-nilly, that doesn't mean woe is us and look how bad it is. That means a focused approach within the bounds of the First Amendment, allowing us to respond to despicable, vile hate speech with condemnation and speech that is focused. You know, a very interesting study just came out too, actually. One is that the way hate is spread on the internet very much follows a public health model that maybe 5 months ago we wouldn't be attuned to, but now everyone understands public health models. And when you see how hate spreads in the internet and social media, it really follows that model. There are hubs of infection. You see places where there's really an incredible spread of this contagion. It really is very much like that. And so you've got to have a public health paradigm for addressing it, focusing condemnation, focusing that attack on the areas where it matters most. The second study I want to talk about came out of Europe. And this is a warning to all of us. The process of radicalizing a young man, because it's almost always men, but the process of radicalizing a young man on the internet is 1/3 the time that it takes to radicalize someone by traditional means, you know, meetings and movements and offline, you know, stuff. And so this is real. I mean, this process of radicalization that's being used by all three ideological camps. The far right uses it, the radical left uses it, and Militant Islam uses it to recruit globally, to recruit adherents and to radicalize them. This is something that has to be addressed, not only to fight Jew hatred, but also to unlock the battle against so many other kinds of ethnic and religious hatred that we're seeing spread on social media. We've got to confront this. And so this is a key important point, which is why, as Holly asked before, I've got an Assistant Special Envoy assigned to focus exclusively on the problem of internet and social media hatred.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question comes from AJC Honorary President John Shapiro in New York. It says, hi, Elan, thank you for your efforts. How concerned are you about the recent rise of neo-Nazi participation in the German police force and military?
Well, John, it's great to hear your name. I wish I could be with you in person. Thank you for that question. Look, I am concerned. There is a rising neo-Nazi movement, and not only in Germany. You know, we're seeing it in other countries as well. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it in other places. And it's a real problem. You know, we're seeing, like I said before, an attack every week in Strasbourg. It's not only always physical. Sometimes it's a vandalism, but we're seeing an anti-Semitic event of one kind or another on the average of every week in Strasbourg, France. Most of those are coming out of the far right community, whether you call them neo-Nazis or fellow travelers, but something in that mix. And so it is a growing problem. The shooter in Halle, Germany, who attempted to murder a synagogue full of Jews on Yom Kippur in Germany. You can't get a more clear example. And by the way, I arrived in Halle, Germany to visit the scene of that horrific attack on October 27th. And I chose that date specifically because that was the 1-year anniversary of the murders at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue, also by a far-right, radicalized ethnic supremacist. And I chose that day to arrive in Halle to make the case as clearly as I could, not only in words, but in acts, that this phenomenon of rising anti-Semitism is not only a German problem, and it's not only a European problem, it's not only an American problem, it is a global problem that requires nothing other than a focused, coordinated, global solution. And that's an important part of my work, to bring all of our countries together to focus on the problem and really put forth the strongest and most concerted efforts at the points where they matter most and make the most impact to end this horrific phenomenon.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of questions on the United Nations, including one here from Elan Carr, who says many bodies of the UN regularly pass more resolutions condemning Israel than those condemning all of their countries in the world combined. From your perspective, do you think the best way to fight this is withdrawing, or do you think there's a way for the US to stay in and fight the fight? And separately, how significant is the appointment of a UN envoy to deal with anti-Semitism? Do you think the envoy will be effective?
So first of all, no, we shouldn't withdraw. Yes, we should stay in. The UN is a key multinational forum, and the United States plays a leading role and must continue to play a leading role. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't walk out of certain organizations that have been, seemingly irredeemable. We did that with the UN Human Rights Council. We basically, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo said, that's it. We're taking our chips and walking away, because if it's incorrigible, then our presence there is no longer, if we're not going to be able to change this, and we're walking up, standing up and walking out. It's key to show that you're willing to do that. But the UN is a key forum, and we've got to engage. And yes, even in the UN, where things have been so tough on anti-Semitism, where by virtue of the IRA definition, it's clear that there's been anti-Semitism, right? Applying a double standard to the state of Israel is an example given as a manifestation of anti-Semitism. The UN does it more than anyone else. And not only the Human Rights Council, but certainly the Human Rights Council. It's appalling. I mean, you just look at this blacklist of companies doing business in the disputed territories of Judea and Samaria, right? Blacklisting companies, basically saying, if you're doing business with the Jews, we're going to call you out. I mean, what a disgrace that was to publish that list. And so, yes, there are problems at the UN, but let me say this very clearly. There has never been more good news from the UN than we're having now. First of all, we've got a Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who really cares about this and is committed to this fight. Second of all, we have pretty much the best report I've ever read that came out of the UN. I mean, when I read this report, I had to keep flipping to the first page to make sure I was reading a UN report. This is a report by my dear friend, Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid, who is a Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion, who wrote a report on anti-Semitism so thorough, so comprehensive, so excellent. My team wouldn't have written a better report. I mean, it's just excellent. I commend it to all of you. It covers the whole gamut, right, left, Islam. It covers bans on religious freedom, bans on shechita and milah, which we didn't talk about, but is a key issue now going on in Western Europe. You can't even believe that countries are literally banning kosher slaughter and talking about banning brit milah, male circumcision. You can't even make this stuff up, but that's happening. And so he talks about that. I mean, it's just an incredible report. And then lastly, as you mentioned in your question, Secretary General Guterres, and I thank him for this, has assigned a a anti-Semitism portfolio specifically to a senior official of the United Nations to say that, look, we're going to be monitoring and combating anti-Semitism as a matter of policy and as a matter of administrative management. That is a very important development. And so, yes, I think that there are very good developments in the UN. I think a lot of that is thanks to American leadership. You know, I mean, our ambassador, Kelly Craft, has been a champion of defending the Jewish people and defending the state of Israel. Ambassador Nikki Haley before her, of course, a champion of this. And so, you know, I think that U.S. leadership has played a central role in what we've seen at the UN, which is really a sea change. Now, we have more work to do. Let me be clear. We definitely have a lot more work to do, but we're on the right track.
Thank you. Our next question comes from AJC CEO David Harris, who says, "Hi, Elan. Thanks so much for joining us and for your inspired leadership. Please talk to us some more about your efforts to deal with anti-Semitism in Arab and Muslim worlds, which is a top priority for AJC. Do you travel there, pre-COVID, of course? Are leaders responsive? What's been done and what more can be done?" So
thank you for that nice compliment. But inspired leadership, David, you're exhibit A of inspired leadership. Really, you've built the AJC into a global powerhouse, and I can't thank you enough for your leadership and everything you do to make our world a better place. Really, thank you, David. And thanks for having me on. So yes, this has been a priority for me. We actually had a trip planned to the Arab and Muslim world earlier this year, which sadly we had to cancel because of COVID. I hope to be able to go back there as soon as the pandemic is lifted. I hope to be able to go there and engage. I've been engaging in the most productive way possible, and I don't want to disclose diplomatic confidences, but we've engaged on several bilateral fronts in the most productive way possible to not only combat anti-Semitism, but to drive philo-Semitism. Again, two sides of the same coin, very, very important to do both. To give one example that was public, this I can disclose, the Muslim World League, under His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed Al-Isa, has been just, I mean, a game changer. I mean, here you've got a Saudi cleric, former Minister of Justice, one of the most powerful and important Muslim leaders in the world, who is standing up to anti-Semitism, partnering with us. I had the great privilege of introducing him for an award he received, the first ever inaugural award by the Combat Antisemitism movement, which is in addition to an organization, is an umbrella with many, many other organizations that have signed on to the Combat Antisemitism movement. Sheikh Al-Isa invited me actually to address the closing session of a Muslim World League conference in Geneva. And I did that. And I talked in front of the Muslim World League, right next to him, talked about the importance of combating anti-Semitism. Look, this is a new world we're in. I mean, we are seeing changes in the Arab and Muslim world that a few years ago we couldn't have imagined. And this is just a gift. We've got to embrace this and champion it and capitalize it. And like I said, I've been working on some initiatives that maybe I think we're delayed a little bit because of COVID, but hopefully we'll be able to complete them. But I can't disclose them now, but really important initiatives that I think could be game changers for the Middle East. Let me say something else about the Middle East, because this is important too. I said this before, we got to talk about the bad news too. In the world today, one of the leading sources of anti-Semitism on earth is the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is impossible to overstate the danger that this genocidal regime poses for the Jewish people and for world peace. The mischief of the Islamic Republic knows no bounds. Their support of terrorism, mass murder in Syria, undermining Yemen, threatening the entire Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, including Bahrain, including other countries. I mean, it is absolutely critical that we call out the Islamic Republic, that we maintain what this administration has done, which is our pressure campaign, our maximum pressure campaign to put forth and impose punishing economic sanctions to contain the incorrigible damage and mischief of the Islamic Republic is absolutely critical. If we unplug that bottle. My goodness, I mean, the danger that this regime poses can't be overstated. And so we have to continue to do that. We have to ensure that the UN arms embargo set to expire this October doesn't expire, because really, are we going to allow this regime to have more weapons? Are we going to allow them to continue to develop their ballistic missile program, to fund Hezbollah, a genocidal, maniacal terrorist organization that we just commemorated the savagery of Hezbollah in Argentina, that they murdered Jews in the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, and they murdered Jews in Bulgaria. And so we just commemorated the 26th anniversary of those horrific bombings. And so this is absolutely key, because you can't support the movement of the Arab world unless you're also going to clamp down on the greatest threat to that region, which is Iran. And that's a key part of what President Trump and Secretary Pompeo are doing. It's very important we continue that work.
Thank you. And I should also mention, we know Dr. Mohammed Alisa very well at AJC. Just last year, we signed an MOU with the Muslim World League, and we took Dr. Mohammed Alisa to Auschwitz this past January, and to Warsaw, and he recently spoke at our virtual global forum. So just to your point, it really is a different world, a different situation.
And how moving was that? I mean, that Auschwitz visit it brought tears to my eyes. I mean, it was incredible. And his words, what he said, and I mean, just, this is a real leader, and a leader for a better world. And we've got to embrace and champion leaders like Mohammed Alisa, and certainly AJC has done that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know we're running towards the end of the hour. So Holly, I'd like to turn it back over to you and Special Envoy Carr for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Jillian. I just have a final question, and then I'll kind of close this out. Special Envoy Carr, as you know, we have an election coming up in our country, and at AJC, we firmly believe that the fight against anti-Semitism must remain bipartisan, and that anti-Semitism shouldn't be weaponized as a political tool. So how can we work to keep the fight against anti-Semitism bipartisan?
Well, you asked me the easiest question at the end. Look, it has to be bipartisan. And the truth is, it largely is. I mean, we've seen some people, some of them elected officials, sabotage that bipartisanship. Look, who would have thought that, you'd have members of Congress saying what we've heard some members of Congress saying? I mean, this would have been unimaginable only a few years ago. But we've got to keep it bipartisan. And look, it largely is. I mean, I've got to tell you, I work with incredible champions of this cause on Capitol Hill. Some of them are Republicans and some of them are Democrats. We've got great allies who really care about this on both sides of the aisle, who've really, not only supported the cause, but have championed the cause. And that's very, very important. And it's very critical to remember that, and to make sure that the fight for, the fight for the safety of the Jewish people, and the fight to combat this destructive, relentless, reoccurring hatred, this pathology, is really the fight of our time. And it's a fight that all of us have to sign on to, because the stakes couldn't be higher. Not only for Jews, the stakes for America couldn't be higher. When you look at what anti-Semitism does, the destruction it causes in society, you look at the key anti-Semitic movements. I already mentioned Iran, but look at the other movements that define themselves through anti-Semitism. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, of course, Nazi Germany. These are movements that didn't just destroy or attempt to destroy Jews. These are movements that wrecked parts of the world. And so the stakes couldn't be higher. And if we are serious about bequeathing to our children and grandchildren the kind of America that they deserve to have, if we're serious about making our world a better place, if we're serious about elevating the Jewish condition, this has to be one of the first addresses. Fighting this great evil has to be step one. And that's why it's got to be bipartisan. And that's why, I'm so grateful that we've got an administration that has been like some Democratic administrations in the past. Look, I mean, President Clinton was an extraordinary ally in fighting against anti-Semitism. And so You know, thank God we've got a champion in the White House, a champion in the State Department with Secretary Pompeo, and certainly Attorney General Barr has been incredible, and Secretary DeVos. We really are serious about this, and we're going to fight to make sure that we hand over to our kids the world they deserve to have.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. And we are now at our hour, so our time is up. And I just want to close by saying that AJC has had the privilege of working closely with the Office of the Special Envoy, and we continue to support the United States global leadership on this issue. So on behalf of AJC, thank you so much for your time and your commitment to fighting anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, AJC. And Chazak u'Baruch, may you go from strength to strength. Keep doing the wonderful work you're doing. And I know that it's always a source of immense pride for me to work shoulder to shoulder with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now, Jillian, I turn it back to you to formally close our program.
Thank you. Thank you both for such a fascinating and important conversation. And I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us. If you enjoyed this program, please consider making a donation to AJC at ajc.org/donate. Please be well. Thank you and goodbye.